Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Saturday everybody. I hope you are all enjoying your weekend. I'll try to keep today's episode somewhat light. We have some very interesting developments to cover, so let's dive in. And let's begin with Taiwan. We are perhaps past the most dangerous period of the People's Liberation Army's military drills, but currently there are a lot of moving parts with regards to the dynamics around the Taiwan Strait, so let's just move through some of these developments here. We discussed Beijing's Taiwan White Paper earlier this week, the first of its kind in 22 years, and the most aggressive in its policy orientation and recommendations to date. Taiwan's so-called Mainland Affairs Office hit back against the White Paper later this week, expressing, quote, "Taiwan maintains that neither side belongs to the other and firmly refuses one country, two systems. The clumsy political machinations by the authorities in Beijing serves to highlight its barbarian mindset that justifies its ambitions to invade Taiwan at the cost of wrecking the peace in the Taiwan Strait and the region." End quote. In Beijing, state media responded to the Mainland Affairs Office in a series of articles. It's important that we examine here how the Taiwan crisis is being framed by Beijing for a domestic audience. For example, one article titled, "One Country, Two Systems Will Eventually Be Understood and Recognized by Taiwan Compatriots," the state-run Global Times writes the following, quote, "With the issuance of the White Paper on the Taiwan question and China's reunification in the new era drawing malicious attacks from the separatist Democratic Progressive Party, DPP, under the guise of democracy, the DPP authorities are practicing green terror, seeking independence and rejecting reunification. They cannot represent or hold hostage the public opinion of compatriots in Taiwan." End quote. Meanwhile, Hong Kong-based South China Morning Post writes this week that the Taiwan Strait drills shed light on some of Beijing's tactics for seizing the island, which are being studied carefully by analysts. Landing operations involving multiple forces from the PLA Army, Navy and Air Forces would also become more regular in future drills, and, quote, "In a real combat scenario, Beijing would likely go for a quick war rather than blockading the island." End quote. Now jumping to the other side of the Pacific, what do Americans generally think about Taiwan policy? Well, a new survey from the Chicago Council on Global Affairs sheds some light on this question. According to the Council's latest report this week, titled "Americans Favor Aiding Taiwan with Arms but Not Troops," 3/4 of Americans surveyed, 76%, think, quote, "It is likely that Taiwan will see Russia's invasion of Ukraine as a precedent, encouraging it to invade Taiwan." End quote. In the event of a Chinese invasion of the island, majorities would support imposing diplomatic and economic sanctions, 76%, sending additional arms and military supplies to the Taiwanese government, 65%, and using the US Navy to prevent Beijing from imposing a blockade against Taiwan, 62%. A large minority, 40%, quote, "support sending US troops to Taiwan to help the Taiwanese government defend the country against China," end quote. 2 points of note as we examine these findings. One, there is not much disparity between Democrats, Republicans and Independents. And two, the survey was conducted before the Pelosi visit and subsequent PLA military exercises. So it would be interesting to see whether these two developments have made much difference in general American views on Taiwan and specifically these questions polled by the Council. Okay, now speaking of US and China, but moving to the realm of trade, the US administration, the Biden administration, continues to wrestle with the question of what to do with America's Trump-era tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese products coming into the country. In the past, it has considered a combination of eliminating some tariffs, launching a new Section 301 investigation into potential areas for additional tariffs, and expanding a list of tariff exclusions to aid U.S. companies. One camp, led by persons like U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai, advocates maintaining the tariffs and using them as leverage in ongoing trade and IP negotiations, while persons representing financial and corporate interests argue that the tariffs hurt US businesses and exacerbate inflation. But in recent days, Washington and London-based media is reporting that Beijing's muscular response to US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's recent visit to Taiwan has, quote, triggered a recalculation by administration officials who are eager not to do anything that could be viewed by China as an escalation, while also seeking to avoid being seen as retreating in the face of the communist country's aggression, end quote, in the words of UK-based Reuters. The Wall Street Journal reports that before the Taiwan trip, US officials had considered getting rid of some of the tariffs in exchange for reciprocal rollbacks from Beijing, but were rebuffed. Now, it seems, in the current environment especially, unilateral US rollbacks of these tariffs will be very unlikely. As such, analysts argue we should not expect to see any rollbacks of US tariffs on Chinese goods anytime soon. Next up, in yesterday's video, we spent a lot of time discussing the housing crisis, so let's just briefly touch on an important update. And it is indeed an important update, especially for those of us who have been following this crisis day by day, week by week, month by month. Yesterday, Bloomberg Intelligence published a report showing that developers have crashed to rock bottom. Quote, Chinese developers have suffered a meltdown of at least $90 billion in stocks and dollar bonds this year, with a bursting housing bubble and an intensifying debt crisis threatening to inflict even more pain. End quote. The wipeouts have, quote, pushed developers' stocks down to levels not seen in a decade, and China's junk dollar notes are at record lows. End quote. After hitting its lowest level since 2012 earlier this week, the Bloomberg Intelligence gauge of Chinese property stocks has lost 27% this year, adding to a 34% decline for all in 2021. The bonds are even worse. In late July, the median dollar bond price of Chinese real estate firms was 16 cents versus 40 cents in March. Bloomberg's Hong Kong team writes, quote, these so-called distressed levels reflect investors' low expectations for getting their money back on time. End quote. And finally, on Wednesday this week, People's Republic of China Foreign Minister Wang Yi held talks with his Nepalese counterpart in Qingdao, the beautiful coastal city in East China's Shandong province. Nepal's foreign minister made the usual diplomatic statements supporting, quote, China's legitimate position on internal affairs such as Tibet, Xinjiang and Hong Kong, end quote, etc., etc. However, there was an interesting signal coming out of the meeting. That is, Beijing may be paying for a feasibility study for a rail line crossing the Himalayan mountains connecting China and Nepal. Discussions about the possible rail link began back in 2016 after a prolonged blockade of the border with India amid ethnic tensions. On Thursday, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin confirmed to media that Wang Yi had announced that, quote, China will use aid funds for Nepal to support the feasibility study of the China-Nepal cross-border railway and will send experts to Nepal to conduct the survey work within this year. End quote. Wang went on to explain, quote, the two sides also agreed to build the Trans-Himalayan multi-dimensional connectivity network, end quote. Now, if such a project, this rail line, does go forward, it would represent an incredible feat of engineering. Such a Himalayan crossing would also be incredibly expensive, with conservative estimates at $30 million per kilometer. This is largely due to the line having a bridge-to-tunnel ratio of over 90%. Building such an expensive line between two sparsely populated and poor regions cannot be justified economically. Thus, the calculus behind the project will be driven by political considerations. The proposed cross-border railway will connect Guyron County, or Jilongshan in Mandarin, in Tibet, southwest of Lhasa, with Nepal's capital Kathmandu, through the Himalayas. Now, taking a step back and looking at the broader geopolitical implications, the project would also put further stress on India's security calculations, forcing New Delhi to reallocate attention and resources away from the Indian Ocean and to its northern border. During the Wednesday meeting, Wang Yi also reconfirmed that Nepal is one of 16 underdeveloped countries to be offered zero-tariff imports on 98% of its taxable products by China beginning the 1st of September this year, development first announced by the Customs Tariff Commission of the State Council back in July. The rail plans fall under the Belt and Road Initiative, Xi Jinping's ambitious international policy objective, to which Nepal has been a signatory since 2017. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, don't forget to hit the like button, it's a huge help. And as always, anyone who wants to go the extra mile and help me keep China Update sustainable, continue making these episodes every day for you guys, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. This is one of the best ways to help me keep this channel sustainable. That is today's episode of China Update, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for the ongoing support. Have a wonderful weekend, a relaxing weekend, and I will see you all on Monday.